Thanks for staying on. We were talking about yet another army personnel who laid his life for our country. This is Naik Subedar Mandeep Singh. He's left behind his 65-year-old mother, his wife, his three sisters, 39-year-old belonging to Patiala from the Rajpura Tehsil, spoke to his family just a few days back. Family is in an absolute state of shock. These were live images of his last and final journey that we were running for you just about 15 minutes ago. As we speak, he is already on his last and final journey while his mortal remains are being cremated. Let's get in a word here of what we're really witnessing and feeling across the country, keeping in mind on what has come in as a very rude shock, the manner in which China has behaved on this de-escalation process. We have with us strategic expert Mr. Maruf Raza with us. Mr. Raza, I appreciate you being with us here. In what we have seen in these past few days, in what we have taken into account, what has been taking place between India and China since the end of May, on multiple level talks, on a long drawn out de-escalation dialogue process which was on, and a sudden turnaround of events.
You see, as far as China is concerned, they're always working to a larger strategic plan. They have been working to occupy as much as possible of the Aksai area and trying to pretend as though they were always there. As usual, the Indian authorities have misread China's intentions and their agenda. Most importantly, we have continued to reinforce a failure, which is 22 rounds of high-level talks and achieving zero, absolutely zero, in terms of gains with the Chinese. Multiple agreements all have a lot of English adjectives thrown in, which tend to confuse the reader. The line of actual control on the ground has not been done, which has led to the fighting between the troops and therefore the death of any bound and innocent soldiers. Soldiers are trained to fight with weapons, they carry weapons. And here there has obviously been a gross misunderstanding of what China had promised and what our soldiers were put through. Yes, certain people need to be held accountable for this wrong direction being given to soldiers to go unarmed in Chinese territory and be ambushed by rods with nails on them by Chinese who call themselves use terrorists, Chinese use thugs. And they are both hand in glove to put pressure on India on either side of Ladakh and Kashmir.
Right. To what you've questioned here, Mr. These are live shots that we're getting in of Naib Subedar Satnam Singh. This is coming in from his hometown and his village in Gurdaspur in Punjab. This is once again, of course, soon after the entire village and family having a chance to bid their last goodbye. Mortal remains further moving up for the last and final journey, his cremation. The martyr's family here, they were first informed that he was no more. Remember, Satnam Singh has succumbed to his injuries. So the family, which was initially firstly informed about the news of the attack, saying that he has suffered injuries. But in a few hours till late in the night, a confirmation came in that he hasn't survived, he has succumbed. that came in more of as a rude shock here to the family, which was hopeful that he would manage to survive his injuries. 41-year-old who joined the army in 1995. He is survived by his wife and 2 children. These are very poignant moments that we are getting to see now, of course, of all our martyrs while they're making their last and final journey, and losses that the families of our martyrs have suddenly suffered. We were in conversation with strategic expert Mr. Maroof Raza. Mr. Raza, you were, of course, asking questions on how this has been, in your understanding, a massive miscalculation on why our army men were sent up unarmed. I would like to bring into account a latest tweet now that has also come in from the MEA. Mr. Jaishankar has tweeted out saying that our men were not unarmed, but it is usual for not to be using the arms in a process of de-escalation. How would you like to read that?
Well, we are obviously operating from a high moral ground. But, in war and conflict, morality, unfortunately, is the first casualty. What you need to understand is that the Chinese have misled us. We have not been able to gauge their agenda very clearly. And in this case, while talks were on, we should have not trusted them and taken precautionary measures that if in the eventuality you are sending a commanding officer with some troops, you should have been prepared for the situation spilling out of hand and getting adequate quick reaction teams to come in and respond with fire. You cannot allow a commanding officer with a platoon worth of troops, and as I can see pictures of these heroes from Punjab, they were not from Bihar regiment, but they were from the artillery. So obviously they were part of a supporting element, the fire support element that is normally provided to infantry units and brigades. And this was probably an observation officer who had gone from the artillery along with the commanding officer of the Bihar unit. Now, yes, we suffered casualties. Yes, in the words of the Prime Minister, marte marte mare hain. But the bigger question is that who authorized their going across to engage with the Chinese to try and check whether the de-escalation and the movement backward has taken place, and under what promises. Quite clearly, we have been, this reminds me in some ways of how the Kargil conflict escalated. There was a lieutenant from the Jat regiment called Lieutenant Kalia. He had gone for a patrol. The Pakistanis who had intruded into Kargil and the irregulars who were operating with the regular army lynched this man who was absolutely brutally murdered. And as Jaswant Singh, the then foreign minister, said that this smacks of medieval barbarism. What Chinese have done is also medieval barbarism.
Right.
And it must be seen as such. And the rules of engagement.
Mr. Raza, in what you're trying to put in perspective for us here. Yes, so you're calling this a miscalculation as you yourself are trying to process information that has been coming in source-based or directly in official statements from the External Affairs Ministry or the Army. Have you been able to gauge how this all broke out? Because if this is a clash that has taken place in our territory at the Gulwan Valley, does this help you understand the extent of the misunderstanding of the Chinese intent?
Yes. The first thing is that, while we can keep calling it our territory and they'll keep calling it their territory, the Chinese follow a simple strategy of land grab. Some people call it salami slice, which means that they come in, and any area which is unoccupied, they pitch tents, maybe even make light small bunkers and sangars, and then they claim they've been there forever. The Pakistanis did the same
Yes.
at Kargil. What happens is, in all these high altitude mountainous borders, is that not every inch of ground can be physically covered. We have adequate troops there in the event of a conflict, but conflicts are not fought by putting a soldier on every inch of ground. You occupy certain areas, and certain areas are under your watch in which you physically send patrols or to cover them with fire. Now, one shortcoming of our engagements with the Chinese has been that the Indian government, particularly the foreign ministry, is in charge of your engagements with the Chinese on the Sino-Indian boundary, whether in Ladakh or Arunachal. And they take pride in the fact that we don't exchange fire. But when you don't exchange fire, you cannot cover every piece of ground, because soldiers tactically cover ground by fire, by looking out at it, and by physical patrolling. There are areas which you leave, which is agreed as yours, and you patrol it from time to time to show your dominance of the area. Now, what the Chinese have done is, the areas that you did not occupy, they come in, occupy, and then they get into a physical altercation to say, don't push us out, we were already here. So what happens is that every now and then, they alter the boundary line by physical occupation of more and more areas which were traditionally never occupied, but patrolled, watched, or used by observation posts to be covered by fire if need be. And in this case, what has happened is, this particular unit and subunit was probably sent to go and check up. Had they vacated the area, when they went to check, the Chinese were there. A physical and verbal altercation led to pushing and jostling. I believe some people fell into a ravine and a nala and died because of head injuries and cold water that gushes there at sub-zero temperature. And some people were just simply clubbed to death. I'm told some firing took place also.
Absolutely. Right. Mr. Maroof Raza, appreciate you speaking with us, strategic expert with us over the phone there, in giving his point of view on why he thinks something has been amiss. This has been a massive misunderstanding of the real intent of China, and our battalion should have never been sent there as a patrolling party with a very senior commanding officer with the instruction of not using arms. But there is, of course, further clarity. The MEI now says that it is usual not to use arms in a de-escalation process, but it's not as if our men were not unarmed. So we have, of course, as a decent army, done the decent thing in this process, unlike how China has behaved as an absolutely street brute force in this clash. With that, we are slipping into a breather. News and updates that continue. Stay on with us.